All right. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Hey, welcome to this week's session over here. So of course, this would be the very last session for the year of 2025, and going forward, we'll probably be shifting our live session onto Monday. Actually, previously before we run on Tuesday, we have been running it on Monday. And then because of some arrangement, we have to shift it to Tuesday. So moving forward, going into the new year, we'll be doing back on Monday so that at least it gives you an whole week of kind of outlook and prep. Okay. Yeah, so just a heads up on that. Going into the new year, starting next week, we'll be doing on Monday evening. Okay. So with that said, let's jump into the markets. I think from last week to today, really there isn't much of a movement except for perhaps what has recently happened on the precious metals, gold and silver. Okay, and of course this week here, generally we are gonna be a little bit slower in the market as well. We don't expect a lot of trades, simply because it's still part of the holiday session. Okay, of course, first is the new year. The markets are just going to be a little bit quiet, right? Liquidity is going to be lower, so that's something that we will not be overly active in for trades. Okay, so just updates, so that we are keeping ourselves informed in terms of what the market development is. Okay, so let's start off with the euro dollar over here. So currently we are looking at the similar kind of expectation from last week, where if I zoom out here, okay, we're looking at a possible triangle structure, okay, on a bigger scheme of things. So moving forward, we are looking at a possible move back to the bottom of the channel or trend line, right? Now, we did not really have any sign of confirmation that price is coming down yet. All we have right now is an early sign of an exhaustion to the upside, right? So what we can see here is that this high has been taken out, but not with strong momentum. Okay, and the market seems to be coming back down from there. Okay, though of course we're in the holiday season, so the move to the downside as of now, okay, this portion here is so far rather corrective in nature, right? So if this comes down pretty impulsive, then that would kind of be an indication that perhaps this is a double top, and especially if we can break out this neckline, then we can start to look for downside opportunity from there. Okay, so that's the take on euro dollar. Obviously I feel that this week probably not going to be happening much on this particular pair. I don't think there will be a setup coming in. Probably the earliest is wait until next week, right? We want to see that impulsive move to the downside, then we can start to look for short. Okay, then GBP USD over here, kind of a little bit different from the overall structure compared to Euro. Okay, so GBP USD, we are looking at a 5-wave structure right now, with wave 4 potentially completed here, and of course wave 5 is in development. Okay, we do see a little bit of a pullback sign here, so if price can continue to pull back correctively towards the 50 and 618 area, somewhere around 1.34, right, which is also a psychological number. And of course, if you kind of look left a little bit, we do have the confluence of previous where price has been reacting of it. Okay, the zone. We can expect one more push to the upside, right? So overall for GBP USD right now, we're gonna maintain a bullish bias drop. Okay, if price can pull back correctively, as I mentioned, that's something we can look to buy, right? So this one here, probably this week is going to be slow. So that's where the corrective development might happen. And if that's going to be the case, then we got to time it a little bit, maybe going into next week. That's where you can get the setup to look for the buy trade to the upside. Okay, so that's on pound. And Aussie here, kind of generally quite similar. We are expecting the Aussie to pull back. Now, of course, if you're kind of like a very, very short-term trader, maybe on a 30-minute time frame, can consider to look for opportunities to trade the pullback. Not something I'll be doing for this week, again, simply because we are in a holiday season, right? Liquidity is going to be lower. Movements in the market is a little bit less kind of a predictable in a way, because when there are less liquidity in the market, prices tends to move a little bit more erratic, right? So short term, if we can get a pullback, right, and in the shorter time frame, it starts to show sign that this is starting to pull back already. We are expecting price to come back towards the 50 and 618 zone, which put us around 0.6660 to 0.6640. So of course, if you're looking at short-term trades, right, to the downside, then that becomes your target. If you're looking more of a swing style, right, then I think this would be very much similar to the pound, where likely we're going to wait for this week going into next week for the correction to develop, and then the setup to establish itself going into next week, right? So that's more like next week trade setups, okay? So that's on the Aussie. And next up here is the Canadian, right? So Canadian here is pretty straightforward as well. Overall, we're looking at a 5-wave. 1, 2, 3. Potentially third wave has been completed. And right now, price may be developing the pullback, right? So again, if you're looking at kind of like very short term, maybe 15-minute, 30-minute time frames, then the pullback can open up a possible trade opportunity. Of course, wave 4 here, tendency of a pullback around the key area on Fibonacci retracement is between the 236 and 382, right? There's a good possibility price may come back, I would say, towards the 382 area. Okay, and of course, maybe a little bit higher, because we do have some areas of liquidity up here as well. And that will put you around 1.3830, right? So there's a good possibility the pullback can be a little bit deeper, breaking this high before the move back down, right? So of course, depending on how price is going to move forward from here, short term, I think definitely that is an opportunity to look out for. But as a swing trade, then the upside is something that may or may not be attractive, right? Really depending on how price is going to develop from here. Okay. So I would more or less, I would say, focus more on the sell side, waiting for price to actually complete the wave 4. Ideally, wave 4 should develop correctively. It shouldn't go up too fast. And if that's the case, right, if it develops correctively, then we have a potential sell setup going into the new year as well, right? So I think, again, most of this major dollar pairs here, probably this week, it's going to take time to develop the pullback, right? Because corrective phase requires a little bit more time to develop. If that's the case, then of course, going into a new year, we may have very nice little setups coming in, right? Next week or even the following week. Okay. So that's on the dollar Canadian. Then I'll like touch on a little bit on the dollar yen, right? Now, obviously, dollar yen, if you look at it from the structure perspective, we have been in a sideways movement since, I would say, late November. Okay, so for almost close to a month, we have been trading between the top at 158 to the bottom around 154, right? It's a pretty wide range, but nonetheless, the market has been ranging since then. Okay, so in terms of the directional forecast right now, okay, this is one of potential scenario where we are looking at, this is the black X wave, right? And then the internal here, we have a 1, 2, 3, a pullback. Market seems to be respecting this swing low. And then of course, if that's going to be the case, we're going to expect another 3-wave move to complete, okay, the bigger Y, okay, and of course, even the blue bigger degree Y. Not a very high conviction kind of a setup or analysis on this, okay, but this is one of the scenarios that we are kind of looking at right now, okay. But the complexity and the challenge on this, of course, is because the market is in a range, so it's a bit challenging to kind of, or say it's a little bit difficult to be confident in saying that price is likely going to go higher from here. The reason is also if today you look at a higher time frame, okay, the price has been moving up quite a bit, right? Now, are we going to see some resistance around where that previous high area is, which confluence very, very nicely around that 159? Very, very possible, okay? So, dollar yen here at this very moment is not the clearest structure in terms of directional bias, okay? So we are in the new kind of like a New Year holiday season as well. So I would say like this one here definitely we don't need to stress about it, right? We're just gonna leave it for the entire this week, and then maybe next week we'll see how things are gonna develop, right? Great. So with that, let's talk a little bit about the commodities, right? Because I think silver for the past weekend, right? I mean, the past 2 days over the weekend, I've started to see a lot of like posting about how silver, um, it's hitting all-time high. Huge movement in silver to end off the month. Now, if you're not in silver trade, then that's something that you want to be very, very careful, right? Because a lot of times when we start to see postings like that, right, or even articles talking about it, it's often too late to be joining in. Okay, so you want to be patient in a way. Now, will silver continue to move higher eventually? Very, very high possible. Okay, I'll say very, very high possibility, right? But will it move higher every other day? Very unlikely, right? Especially since the news is there. But of course, the macro and the fundamental forces will very likely push silver higher, right? Because China starts to impose some limitation. That as well, once supply gets even smaller, right, or supply gets even more limited, okay, prices of it tends to go even higher. Okay, so gold and silver right now, I would say, even for gold, right? I mean, we are looking at FIB area here around the 1618 extension. It came quite close. It did not really tag it. It was like about $25 of the difference. But again, you need to understand that these FIBs are for reference. It doesn't mean that price 100% need to tag it. Okay. So price action is always more important, right? How price is developing. So you can see this down move here as of today is rather significant, right? And can we say that wave 3 is completed even without hitting that 1618 reference? Absolutely, right? So the thing here is, if I'm going to update a little bit, and let's just say adjusting this for the part where wave 3 is completed, and right now we are pulling back as wave 4. Okay, then the question is, of course, where would wave 4 see support? Okay, and this is where we're going to take FIBS retracement from where wave 2 ends to where wave 3 currently is. The expectation here is between 4420 to 4340. Okay. And of course, we're kind of expecting a little bit more of a 3-wave development, and then a push back to wave 5. Okay. So with that said, would I be suggesting to look for the pullback trade to the downside? Probably not, right? It's not a good idea to be shorting the precious metal, gold, and silver, right? Rather, I would say you wait for this pullback to complete itself and then start to look for more upside, okay? Because I strongly believe that going into the new year, especially January and February, seasonally, right? Or I would say, based on historical seasonal trends, precious metal tends to see bullish sentiment going, end of the year, going into the new year, all the way towards February period. Okay. So while we might see some pullback right now, I don't suggest to be looking at sell side, but instead wait for this to complete this pullback. Look for opportunities to go long, right? Because from a macro perspective to the seasonal perspective to the technical perspective, which we are currently in an uptrend, we break all-time high. All this points towards upside being a high probability direction. Okay, so that's something you want to focus on, right? In terms of gold. Okay, so areas to look out for is around 4420 to 4340. That's the zone. Okay, and of course, invalidation level is where wave 1 territory is. So that's on gold, and then of course silver is generally pretty similar, right? You can see this move to the downside as of today again, right? I feel that the pullback is starting, right? Now again, this kind of drawing may not be the best, but let's just hit this a little bit, adjust it a little bit to make it a little bit more visually pleasing, okay, in a way. So that's the expectation of silver, right? I would again say that um, we are definitely looking at a possible pullback, right? But I wouldn't again suggest to sell silver. Same thing in gold, right? You know, wait for the pullback to complete itself and then start looking for the side. Now, can silver pull back a little bit deeper, maybe towards the 50% mark at 66.2? Possible as well, right? So you want to keep an eye on areas around the $70.40 to $66.30. Now, it's a pretty wide area, right? Between 70.4 to 66.2. It's not a small zone, right? So what I would say is, wait for the pullback to complete itself first, right? Now, what is a good time estimate or time expectation of a pullback? We can always look at historical reference, right? So if you look at this here, let me use another tool. Okay, to kind of mark this out, right? So let's use the date range, right? So you can see previously this little pullback here took about 36 bars. Okay, so this is on a 4-hour chart, which is equivalent to about 8 days, right? Which means this pullback lasted for 8 days. Okay, now let's just do a simple duplicate on this, right? And let's just say, all right, if that took 8 days, let's just do a simple projection right now. Let me just put it up there. Here's this. Right, so let's just do a simple projection and say that if this pullback is gonna be the same duration, then you can see, this cursor all the way down vertically. That's gonna be a projection towards 6th of January, right? Which is basically next week. Okay. So that's something you can use to give yourself some time expectation as well. Now, again, it's not gonna be perfect. The rule of, I would say, guideline of alternation, if wave 2 is simple in its correction, wave 4 can be a little bit more complex. So this can actually take maybe a little bit longer, maybe 12 days. And so, but at least it gives you some sort of a timeline projection, right? You know that, all right, you want to be patient and give it time for it to prove to you that it's indeed a corrective pullback and not an impulsive one coming down. Okay, so this is a little bit that a little trick that you can use as well to give yourself some expectation so that you don't FOMO. You know roughly how much time you need to give for the market to eventually prove to you something, right? So that's my take on gold and silver, right? You want to wait for the correction to happen and then look for buy trade opportunity, right? And then the whole idea about correction or a corrective pullback is you want to give it sufficient time. It needs to pull back slowly, right? Because if it pulls back too fast, then that's a very strong momentum to the downside. You do not want to be buying when the momentum to the downside is very strong. Okay, so that's on silver. Okay, and let's talk a little bit about crude oil as well, because I feel that crude oil here has an opportunity as well, right? But of course, putting aside that this week is holiday season, all right? Again, personally, I'm not going to be actively taking trades. So crude oil over here had a decent bounce off that low, right? I think last week did talk a little bit more about how commodities like that tends to see support, especially when price goes below what we call a production cost, or coming very, very close to production cost, it tends to bounce, right? So it did bounce last week. It came back down, pulled back a little bit towards the 15.618. Pretty decent reaction so far. Of course, we just need to be open to the idea that this pullback is 1, the bounce is 2. We can see one more move back down before the pop, right? Very, very possible as well, because we can't expect a 3-wave pullback, right? So meaning price can actually make another move back down towards 56.4 area before the move eventually to the upside. But I think more importantly here is price needs to respect that swing low, which is the invalidation level around 55. Right? So as long as price stays above 55, we're going to be primarily looking more on upside, right? With a final target here at around $62.50. Okay. So that's the take on crude oil. Obviously, you want to be focusing more on like buy setups, buy opportunities that you can actually look to get involved in crude oil. Okay. Then we have S&P. So very likely the year is going to end off bullish, right? I mean, I don't see like the next 1 or 2 days the market will just crash suddenly. Okay. So very likely we're going to end off 2025 in a bullish year. And I think going into 2026, we're likely going to maintain a bullish bias on the US equity. So I think this is pretty straightforward, right? Any corrective pullback, you definitely want to see it as a buy setup. Okay. Right now, obviously, we don't have anything right on our radar. But if you look at this internal move here, okay, key level around the 50 and 618 would be around the 6,800 level, okay, 6,800 range. That will be the area that we can look to buy. Okay. So this is on equity side of things, pretty straightforward there. Next up is the yen, all right, pound yen. Now pound yen is quite clean in the overall structure at this moment. Okay. Now, if you take everything in isolation, right, it means if you just look at this pattern itself, we have this impulsive leg. This one seems to be developing corrective right now. This is a very clean little pattern for upside. Okay, meaning the bias right now is definitely bullish. But of course, if you don't take it in just in its isolation, right, which means you look at context as an overall. You just want to be aware that price has been extending its move to the upside for some time. Will there be an exhaustion in price to the upside? Likely as well. Okay, now obviously we won't know where the top is gonna be until it establishes itself. So every time we take a buy, you know, when we're so high up there, right? Which means you didn't really see any major significant correction after this move. Okay, you can see after this correction, the price just keeps going, right? So this gives the perspective where we are definitely still bullish, but we want to be careful because this pop here can result in eventually the start of a bigger pullback or retrace. So the buy, I mean, we're not selling obviously right now. Okay, we're still looking more on the buy side of things, but the part here is more of like, if you're looking to buy, then your take profit, you want to be a little bit more aggressive, right? Meaning it hits certain previous swing high level, you might want to just consider taking profits off the trade. Okay, so the key area we're looking at right now is 208.60 to 209. But we'll see how things roll from here, right? Because this setup is great, right? The only thing that is not so great is that this week we have a new year on Thursday. Okay, so we'll see, right? We'll see again. I think the daily basis, you know, when we look at this here, I'll share a view, you know, whether it's worth or not, right? But just to you know put it there, personally, I'm not too keen in taking any trade this week. Okay, but of course, if there's a valid setup, I'll just share with you guys as well, and then you know you can make your own decisions as to whether it's something that you're comfortable taking as well, right? So that's my take on GBP JPY. Slightly different for the Aussie yen. Okay. Now overall structure, I think it's also bullish. Okay. But pound yen here has, you know, a little bit of sign that the pullback is corrective. Aussie yen hasn't really shown that yet. Okay. But I think the overall structure is more or less there, where we are still bullish, you know, as long as price respect this invalidation swing low at 102.30. Okay, meaning as long as price stays above this level, we are generally bullish, and then we can expect price to continue to hit higher. So key area for this right now, 15,618 pullback is around 103.40 and 103.80. Very, very similar to the perspective on pound yen. You know, if you can get a corrective pullback, then that would be an area, an opportunity that we can look to buy. Okay, with a target at 106.40. So quite straightforward. Then we have the pound Aussie. Okay, so pound Aussie right now, I'll update this here a little bit, right? Because I feel that with the current development, there's a very, very good possibility this may develop into a bigger structure that looks something like this. Okay, so you're gonna be expecting and forecasting this, okay, as a 3-wave pullback. Order. Okay, something like that. Right. So that's what we're gonna look out for. Now whether you want to look for the buy, possible again as a short term, I think there will be some setup establishing itself. And then if you're looking at short term buy, then of course, you know, this channel structure here, we'll be looking at targets around 2.0350. Okay, but if you're more of a swing trade, then you want to look out for sell as long as price remains below that swing low, right, which is at 2.0470. If price is below that, you know, then this area is where you can look to sell it. If you go down to the lower time frame, right, so if I have like show you a little bit here, okay, on the H1, you can see that this move here was very corrective in a way, right? Very, very slow. And then we get a pretty impulsive pop, right? But of course, bear in mind the context here is that we are in a holiday season. Okay, so things like this gonna have to consider, right? But on the hourly, you can see we do have this feather gap here, which potentially builds into a setup, right? Because you can see the lows has been taken out, right? Which acts as potential liquidity sweep. And the high here has also been taken out, right? So this can be a new swing low on the hourly, and then you have a feather gap, and then this can be a swing high if the price starts to pull back. Okay, this zone here can be an opportunity to look for the pullback trade to the upside. Okay, again, if you pull in fibs, right? If you take the intraday perspective, we have that area around there as well, right? So the thing here is we have a setup, right? We have a valid setup, and then on a high time frame, we have that perspective where this can potentially go higher, right? Again, am I gonna take this buy trade setup? Probably not, simply because again we are in this holiday season, right? If you're not, then different story. I might be considering that. Okay? But having said all this, does it mean that this setup will not work out, right? No, right? It can also work out even in the holidays, low liquidity season. The thing here is, again, you need to cross-check to your own personal preference. Are you comfortable with it? Okay. So that's my take on pound odd. There's definitely the setup over there. The risk to reward ratio makes sense as well, right? Because if you're gonna look to short-term buy here, targets up there definitely is more than 1:2. Okay. In fact, the risk reward ratio itself just a very, very rough estimate. Okay, it might be even bigger than that, but you can see here is almost close to 1:3.7. If you go into more specific part, I think you can easily hit 1:4, right? So it's still a very, very worth kind of like opportunity to consider. Okay. The only thing here is obviously we are in a season where this week liquidity might be lower. Okay, so that's something for you. And then we have Bitcoin. Okay, now BTC here is something that I'm short term still bearish. I think since last week we shared this, nothing much have changed, right? Price has been still consolidating over here. We're still expecting kind of a similar structure here. Nothing has changed. Okay? Yeah, so depending on the time horizon you're looking at for Bitcoin, if you're more of a short, slightly towards a shorter term swing trade perspective, okay, you can consider look for short opportunities around the zone. Okay? If you're more of a long term kind of like hold positions, then you want to wait for price to maybe come back down towards like 77,000. Then I feel that that will be a much better price point to consider kind of accumulating Bitcoin, right? Okay, so nothing really much developing right now in BTC over here. Okay, everything we covered last week is basically still there. Good. Okay, so that's a quick one in terms of the overall market outlook. Okay, yeah, let's see if you guys have any particular questions or any instruments you'd like me to walk through with you. Okay, I do see one request over here asking about what's my view on the dollar. All right, okay. I think my stream just now just dropped a little bit, but it should be back up. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So let's take it from here. So yeah, just now I was mentioning that someone was requesting on the dollar, South African rand, right? So dollar ZAR. Let's take a look at that. Okay. So very quick one here on the 4-hour perspective first. Okay. Overall, the dollar has been quite weak, right? So you can see that we did take out this low. Okay, and let's just see if there's any reference low after this. Have this low here, which I think the market is currently testing. There are a couple of different other lows after which, okay. So let's see what we have right now on the forward, okay. So first thing first, the pattern development on the recent price structure here. Of course, this horizontal line consists of the daily structure swing low, right? Right now, we see that price seems to be developing what we call a crawl, right? Which is coming down without much of a momentum, right? It's slowing down. Oftentimes, this suggests that there's a good possibility price would at least do a pullback, if not a potential reversal. Okay, so what I would say here is at least for the next maybe 1 to 2 weeks for dollar South African rand, there's a good possibility we'll see a push back up. Okay, and of course the idea here is you want to wait for price to give you that confirmation that it's indeed pushing up, right? So what you want to see is the confirmation where price actually successfully take out the 16.78 level, right? Which is where this swing high is. Okay, and then wait for the pullback retest, and then that's potentially your trade setup to go long, right? At least for the near term. Okay, and of course, if you just stretch this out here, price can potentially retrace back towards like 17th level. Okay, so that's my take on dollar South African rand, right? At least for the next 1 to 2 weeks, right? That would be the expectation from my perspective. All good? Cool. So I think that's generally all that I have for this week. Again, these 2 weeks, generally, we're going to take things a little bit slower. And then, of course, just keeping ourselves updated in terms of the development of the market so that next week, the new year, when we come back in, we're at least following through, right, with what's happening. And then we are always ready to get into opportunities that's presented. Okay. So great. That's all I have for today's session. Okay, all the best for those of you trading. Again, I would suggest don't trade going into the New Year Eve. If you want, maybe today and tomorrow. Wednesday probably not. Thursday definitely not. Right, and of course, wishing everyone here a happy New Year as well. Okay, going into 2026. Right, so see you guys.